All right, so everybody, thanks again for listening. Again, if you're listening to us on the airwaves, we appreciate that. If you are listening to us on the internet, podcasting sites, YouTube, we appreciate that also. Please subscribe, share this interview. We do have Jerry Kassar back on from the New York Conservative Party. So we're going to talk about this, Jerry, and thanks so much for coming back on with us. Firstly, I appreciate it.
Good.
All right, so
Thank you.
let's kick this around, Jerry. So can you talk about growing up? How did you get into politics?
Well, I basically had an interest. I was always interested in civics, history, big history buff. But when I was about 18, I had an opportunity to work locally on a New York City mayoral campaign, actually, for a guy who was a radio personality. His name was Barry Farber. And through that mayoral campaign, it was a primary and a general election. I got to meet a number of individuals who were involved in the conservative movement. And then the following year, I started getting involved locally with, local state assembly, state senate campaigns, and also more with the club structure of the Conservative Party in Brooklyn, with clubs, social events, stuff like that. And then I just, I indicated a real interest in government and politics. And from when I graduated, I have a degree in accounting from with an emphasis on internal auditing from Pace University, but I didn't practice. I went right into working in state government for the state legislature. I had a long career with the state legislature, senior roles, chief of staff roles, and I was on a parallel doing political stuff. So, like for example, at one point I was an elector for President Trump. I was an elector for other presidential candidates. I played different roles in the party. And in 2019, I became the state chairman.
So as we keep going into this interview, Jerry, people think, I guess I'll state it this way, people think when they hear Conservative Party, they automatically think Republican Party. Can you talk about how the Conservative Party of New York is totally different than the New York GOP?
Well, New York State has a different mechanism for elections to begin with, and it does allow for a conservative party to exist and flourish. New York State allows for fusion voting, which means if you get 1 million votes on the Republican line and the Conservative Party has endorsed the same candidate and we get 250,000 votes, you have 1,250,000 votes. In other states, you end up with 1 million and you end up with 250,000. You don't have 1 million. So that whole ability to do fusion voting, which I think only exists in 5 or 6 states, allows the Conservative Party to flourish as an independent political organization. Now, philosophically, we are more in tune with the GOP these days, but the party was founded as a pushback on Nelson Rockefeller, who was the original Republican in name only back in the early 1960s, through a large group of Republicans and some Democrats in the state that just wanted an alternative voice. So the major difference from us and them is simply that we are not them. We do independent nominations, independent interviews. We obviously want to win elections, so cross-endorsements are important. But to be honest, in recent years, we haven't found too many Democrats we could cross-endorse. We had over the years found Democrats we could cross-endorse. But now I would suggest to you that is becoming more and more limited to Democrats that are in faith-based type scenarios, Orthodox Jewish elected officials, for example, who by their very nature exhibit a very conservative point of view, which makes them comfortable Democrats for us to endorse. But this is rare and far between.
So when we talk about the GOP and the Conservative Party in New York, is it the same thing as the Democrats in New York with the Working Families Party? Or is that
Not
different?
really. Not really. I would say to you, there are a number of national Republican leaders which are very much to our liking. Whereas I think in the Working Families Party, that's a national socialistic movement that the Democratic Party's been co-opted by. The Conservative Party didn't co-opt the Republican Party. The Republican Party, by its very nature, nationally has been conservative. In New York State, though, we're the good housekeeping seal of approval, and we also are an excellent place for for those blue collar Democrats you spoke about in an earlier interview to find a home to vote. We have 150,000 members, enrolled members, but we get anywhere between 250 and 300,000 votes. So clearly there are a lot of individuals and other political parties that are choosing to vote on our line.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because I hear that all the time with, with the Democrats and the Working Family Party in New York. And I didn't know if it was, so they don't do the fusion voting, the Democrats and the Working Families Party in New York?
They do, but they don't necessarily, no, they do, but it's not really the same. It's just not really the same. They are, the Working Families Party in New York creates a lot more manipulative type scenarios to gain political leverage. We kind of like try to start out on the same page by just simply our interview process. So they had a side deal, as you just saw with Hochul. They endorsed a guy named Williams, but they had a side deal, which they publicized that if he loses, we'll switch over. We're a lot simple. We endorsed Zeldin actually a week before the GOP did.
Wow. Okay.
So, I mean, we endorsed them, then they endorsed them. So, and I didn't spend my nights figuring out what they were going to do. Don't misunderstand me. We talk a great deal, and I'm extraordinarily pleased when we're on the same page. But Zeldin was the guy we wanted. We endorsed him. It was kind of that simple.
I just want to quickly go into this audience question because we do have another interview that the audience will be seeing, and I just wanted to get these questions in. But this is an audience question, someone from New York, from the Bronx, in your neck of the woods, saying, what does Zeldin have to do to beat Hochul? They kind of talked about, and I'm not going to get too deep into what they said, but they kind of spoke about the concealed carry law and how Hochul's talking about that and is pushing that. And, with all the gun violence, I mean, it all goes back to crime, which people will hear when we talked earlier. But, go ahead.
Zeldin's a doctrinal conservative. So as people well know, he's strong on the Second Amendment, strong on the concealed carry. And as such, he's not somebody I worry about where he's going to be on issues. I think the biggest thing is the state there's an environment in the state that gives an opportunity for a Republican to get elected governor, which does not normally exist. So one, you have to be, it's like, that old lotto thing. You got to be in it to win it. Lee got in it, taking a great risk because he gave up his congressional seat. And he believed he could beat Cuomo, and he certainly believes he can beat Hochul. And if anything, the environment in the state for the Democratic Party's become worse. I mean, what he needs to do is he needs to raise money because he's not ready yet to go toe-to-toe with her on money. I mean, the corruptness of New York State politics, where those in power can obtain financing simply due to the fact that they can deliver money back, which Hochul is a master of, does give her a certain dollar advantage, but she's going to need to spend a lot of money to counter the arguments that she's just a run-of-the-mill, out of touch New York State Democratic politician. So he has to raise money, travel the state like he does, continue to organize and increase his followings among non-traditional Republican voters. Basically, there are a lot of people in the state that have just had harm done to them by the current state affairs here. People that you would not have necessarily thought of because you'd have a lot of parents now because of the masking rules saying they are afraid to elect another Democrat. He needs to be the magnet for those voters, and he can be that magnet. And to me, that's his path to victory.
And this is the last audience question before we end this part of the interview. Were you surprised that Tom Suozzi did as bad as he did in the Democratic primary against Hochul? And Hochul's got so much bad press against her. And Suozzi is a Democrat, but he's somewhat moderate and middle of the road compared to the other Democrats that were running in that primary.
Well, initially, I would have definitely agreed with you. Definitely. I said it to people. But as we got later into that whole campaign, it became more and more obvious that the turnout was going to be extraordinarily low. And he needed a bigger turnout. He was not able. I guess I would say to you, he was able to climb the mountain, but not actually get over the hill. And then that was, I think, due to not a lack of money, but essentially a certain lack of interest in the June primary. actually, proportionally, the turnout in the GOP primary was higher, proportionally, less Republican than it was in the Democratic primary. And that's also a signal that the Democratic Party is losing the type of voters. They may still be registered Democrats, but maybe if you're a Democrat and you are absolutely planning to vote for Lee Zeldin, you may not have cared about voting in that primary.
Right. Well, let's go back to 2010, with the Tea Party wave and how that happened. We saw that President Obama had the Democratic Senate, the Democratic House. He did not do much throughout his first 2 years. And then the Tea Party wave swept, state legislatures, Congress, the Senate, also into Republican hands. With that said, what congressmen and women do you see maybe picking up seats around New York? Do you see that happening, or is it just
we are going to pick up seats. We're going to pick up seats. So we had 8 out of 27. Now there's going to be 26 seats. Mark my words, we'll have 10, 11, or 12 seats in the state.
Wow.
We will, in my view, we will hold what we have on Long Island and probably pick up a seat. We will keep them at Malliotaka's seat here, which is Staten Island and Brooklyn, very comfortably, frankly. We are extraordinarily competitive in 3 seats in the Mid-Hudson. We should win 2, if not all 3. And then we have the seats further upstate, which we will hold. So, I mean, my view is, my view is that, you count them on your fingers, but you could end up with 9, 10, 11, even 12 seats. Certainly, I feel that we're going to end up with 9 or 10. I can tell you that.
But Jerry, are you worried about how the debate is going to play in, and the guns too?
I'm asked that a lot. Not really. First of all, a lot of New Yorkers believe New York's laws are far too extreme on abortion. New York has the polling in New York indicates that overturning New York State's current interstate abortion laws is actually popular.
Wow.
Well, it's a 9-month abortion law. It doesn't require a doctor to perform an abortion, and it also allows a doctor on a live birth to let the baby die. I mean, people don't want that. So as far as Roe versus Wade is concerned, it went back to the states. New York is like, I would hope a new governor of New York State would try to pull back some of these state abortion laws, because they are infanticide backed by leading Democratic politicians, and that needs to be said. That needs to be said. But getting back into this, the reality is, when you walk out your door of your house at 9 o'clock at night to walk over to a Subway because you feel you want to go to see a show in the city, and might be on a train coming back, the following happens to you. You walk out of your house, you look to your left and your right. You better have a car in a parking place, because you're going to be afraid to walk to the subway station. When you walk down to the subway station, you're going to be looking to your right and your left when you're on the platform. When you get on the train, you are going to be scared that you're going to be attacked by a crook or a homeless person. When you get off the train in Manhattan, you're going to run to that show. And when you get out of that show, you're going to look for a cab, because let me tell you something, you ain't getting back on that subway. Roe versus Wade, I say getting on the subway is the big issue right now.
Right. And this all goes back to de Blasio, then you're saying?
It goes back to the New York State legislature and their bail reforms. It goes back to a general attitude against police. There are a lot of New York City politicians that still think we have too many police. Think about that.
But wasn't de Blasio releasing a lot of these people out of the mental health wards?
That's state law too. But it's not just in New York City, but clearly New York City has the preponderance of that. There are state rules and regulations which make it difficult for judges to keep people in some sort of incarceration. However, for mental health, there is a law that wasn't being enforced in New York State, which now which we've been pushing for enforcement, which does give the system the ability to force somebody to take treatment. So that law exists, but some of these laws have not been enforced in New York State. Because the problem with a lot of laws give you the ability to go around and tell people, well, they ignore some of the laws because there are so many laws. That is the contradiction of government. Government makes more laws to ignore than they make to enforce.
I'll end with this. And I hate to keep bashing on de Blasio, but it just ponders my mind of how a person that did such a horrific job in the city, that the police hated him, that they turned their back against him at funerals, is now running for Congress.
Well, on that poll, it doesn't look like he's going anywhere on that. He's like in the polling, like seventh or eighth. I don't think he's going anywhere on that. I think, even if you were the ultra liberal who believed in what he essentially stood for, he's proven himself to be so incompetent. You could have somebody you agree with. Let's say you're running a business. You like the guy who came in the door for the job, but you realize he doesn't know how to count. You might not want to put him behind the cash register, right? Even though you like him and wouldn't mind having a drink with him. That is our former mayor to the liberals. For me, I wouldn't have let him in the room. So there.
So we'll end with that. Again, Jerry Kassar, I hope to have you on again before the election, and maybe before we hang up, we can schedule that. But it's an honor having you on, somebody that's talking truth to the corruption and the crime wave that we're having in New York City. It's just a disaster. And hopefully we do get people elected that can, put a stop into this. It's just really horrific. But Jerry, thanks so much for your time today.
Very welcome. Very welcome.